All right, welcome to Destination the Show, episode 23. My name is JD Cameron here, as always, with my guy Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's up, man? How are you?
Just enjoying the beautiful spring weather in February, and
Beautiful.
hoping that it lasts at least until opening day. That's my
Yeah.
goal, anyway.
Hey, man, spring is here. No
And
snow
how
on
are
the ground.
and I need to ask, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for asking. I appreciate it. We are going to cut our normal nonsense and shenanigans because we have a guest we are incredibly excited about today. You're going to know this guest from Baseball America, specifically one of the most plugged in and knowledgeable experts on the international signing window, in addition to being one half of the Future Projection podcast, along with Carlos Colazo. We are, of course, talking about Ben Badler of Baseball America. Ben, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always down for nonsense and shenanigans too. So, but
Yes. Okay,
thanks for
let's
having me
go.
on, guys.
Well,
Okay, so
if that's
go
the
ahead.
case, I got to ask him one question. I'm kidding. JD, he asked my one question, so maybe later. But for anybody that's followed Baseball America, and I feel like I have for as long as I've been on like Twitter or whatever they call it nowadays, your name has always been synonymous with Baseball America. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey from the very beginning, baseball industry, and finally how you ended up at Baseball America, and how I see your picture in my timeline all the time?
Well, yeah, I think ever since probably I figured out or learned how to read, as a little kid growing up with, back when we actually used to have print newspapers delivered to the house, I would rip out the sports page and just like comb over every box score on the kitchen floor with breakfast. And I always knew I wanted to do something in sports as a career if I could. When I was a kid, obviously, first goal was on the field, but realized pretty quickly that was not really going to happen for me in any any sport. But basically, I applied to schools based on it for college, based on which schools had good sport management programs, because I thought that would help me in my career pursuits. So went to UMass Amherst. They have a really good sport management program. Got super fortunate that it also happened to be my in-state school, so the cost was was right for me too. So that was a good fit. So went there and out of college got an internship at Baseball America. That was back in 2007. So we've
Wow.
had a lot of people over the years at BA go through the internship program who've gone on to work full time at BA or who've gone on to other jobs in baseball. I think, yeah, all the way up to assistant GM right now for some clubs. So it was really fortunate to be able to do that. They, just did whatever they asked me to do, or tried to do more than whatever they asked me to do. So I think one of the first lists I ever did was the New England Collegiate Baseball League, a summer college league, and
Amazing.
the number one prospect on that list that year I picked was a reliever. I think it was still a reliever at that point at San Diego State. Put him number one, although I called him Steve Strasburg instead of Steven Strasburg. So felt good about getting the right guy at number one. I wish I kind of gotten his correct name on there, but so they offered me the full time position after that, and still just kind of did whatever needed to be done at the time. And been able started doing pro prospects on the minor league side. Grew into the international stuff as well. I'll do draft coverage as well, and then a whole bunch of other whatever needed to be done behind the scenes. So that was how I got my start at BA.
Which is really cool, because I feel like your list with Steve Strasburg probably is what put him on my fantasy radar, because I drafted him when he was still at San Diego State in the league that I'm in. So I should thank you for that one, because he had some productive years there early in his career.
Understatement.
for my
Yeah,
fantasy team. That was great.
yeah.
So
I think he made himself pretty famous in college. So no help needed from me on that one. Yeah, he's probably still my favorite amateur pitcher ever. Probably just my favorite pitching prospect that I've ever covered. It was like, I mean, you guys, I'm sure remember when he made his debut
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah,
with the
Sunday
Nationals.
afternoon. Yep.
Yeah, it was just it was bonkers, man. It was so much hype. Like he lived up to all of it. Obviously, like the longevity of it. You know, the career didn't. Um, you know, still getting paid. Obviously now he did get that long term contract, but yeah, like when he came up, it was like, man, it was pretty electric.
So you brought up kind of just like dropped in casually there, right? That you like dabble in the international signing period, right? But that has become, I think it's fair to say, like one of your main focuses. And still, if someone was to check out your Instagram reel story, whatever, you are still posting signing pictures of guys like 3-4 weeks after the window opens on January 15th. How did you kind of grow into that niche of the international signing period, and what about that that kind of particular area appeals to you?
Yeah, so it's like I said, I started in 2007, and then in 2008, really started covering the international signing period, which at that time opened on July 2nd. You know, back at the pandemic, they moved the date to January 15th for the opening, but for a long time it was July 2nd. But at the same time, you know, we had covered international signings before. We had done some, you know, pretty small scale preview coverage of it. But a lot of the times it was okay, like after the fact, we heard about this guy who signed for $1 million. Who is he? Let's figure it out after the fact and track down reports. But you know, for me, it was like, hey, we cover the draft at Baseball America like it's the Super Bowl,
Hmm.
right? Like it covers so many prospects for it. We go to so much insane level of depth and detail on all of these players in the draft in the United States, U.S., Canada, Puerto Rico, leading into the draft. But we don't do that internationally. Well, why don't we do that? Like, I mean, obviously, there's so many players in the big leagues, and even so many more players in our prospect handbook who are coming from uh, international signings, especially Dominican Republic, Venezuela. But there's nobody really anywhere at that time who covered for any publication. So part of it was just like, okay, how does this whole process work? Trying to get a better understanding of everything, and we started previewing it and recapping the signings in some more depth and detail after they happened. And then at that time, I don't know, maybe there were maybe like 10, a dozen or so teams that were really competitive players in the international market at that time, like Boston, Seattle, the Yankees, the Mets, some other clubs too. But a lot of them weren't really big players, and the money certainly back then wasn't anywhere near what it was today. But just started putting a lot more work into it, and then it's just kind of grown and grown and grown. And been fortunate to be able to travel down, especially the Dominican Republic, and see a lot of players and build a lot of relationships over the years with a lot of, certainly a lot of scouts with all 30 clubs, getting to know the players, their trainers, coaches, the players' families and stuff. And yeah, like you said, sharing photos of these kids on signing day. I love seeing all these kids being able to celebrate with their families. It's such a life changing day for all these players, whether, obviously whether you're, Leo DeVry and signing for $4.2 million, or, the kid who's signing for $10,000 and just getting an opportunity to get his foot uh, in the door. So, yeah, it's still, to me, the Dominican Republic. I mean, look, I love the United States. I love America. I'm born here, raised here. It's a great baseball country here too, but the Dominican Republic is still my favorite place in the world to go for baseball, because I mean, it's truly a baseball country. Every kid growing up there who has any athletic talent whatsoever wants to grow up to be a baseball player. It's just a baseball crazy country. You just go around all across the island, all across the country, see players every day. They're pro guys, amateur players. So just a special place for baseball.
For sure. And I have a bigger question, but small question. Do you prefer the
I knew
current
you were going to ask this.
signing period, or did you like it better when it was the J2? I like the summer deal personally as a follower of things, because I work in education and that's the summer. So it was easier to. Well, what's your preference?
I think so. There's trade-offs to each one. I think generally the teams prefer July 2nd because you're all right. You're signing the players on July 2nd, right? But they're technically, I mean, unless they were already eligible to sign and they were already 17, 18 years old, those guys could sign and play right away in the DSL. But otherwise, the 16-year-old kids you're signing would be signing, say you sign July 2nd, 2018, you're signing a 2019 contract. So they're signing to play the following year, but they were getting the players signed into their, now they have from July 2nd up until the DSL starts the following year. Those kids are almost, full-time in there, living in the academy, training there, developing there, learning the routine, learning a lot of the fundamentals that, you're signing 16-year-old kids. You are still teaching them a lot of the, some of the basic ABCs of the game, getting in your strength and conditioning program, calories, getting in the cafeteria and the dining hall, putting on a lot of weight and strength that way. So you just had, from July to January, that's like an extra 5 or so, 6 months of development. You can play games. You have your Dominican Instructional League. You had these unofficial games you could play against other teams too, and it was called the Tricky League. It was a great development opportunity for these players to get expedited, and then the players also, I think, are worse off, partly because of that development time that they're losing, but also just because of the way they're getting paid. You're seeing very few players now come over to the States in their first year of signing, and a big part of that is for tax reasons. So if you signed, out of the Dominican Republic for $1 million on July 2nd, you get paid that year. Well, you didn't play any, you didn't work any time in the United States, so you don't owe Uncle Sam any money. Whereas if you come over, now you're signing January 15th. If a team wants to bring you over to the States and play in the Gulf Coast or the Florida Complex League, the Arizona Complex League, well, now you're getting paid that $1 million and you've worked in the United States, so you're gonna have to pay a lot more money in taxes. So that's a big reason, not the entire reason, but it's a big reason why you don't really see many players, unless you're, Ethan Salas and you're from another planet, then, and getting a double A at 16 or 17 years old. That's why you don't see a lot of players coming over to the States anymore for their first year. But, the one definite good thing about it is that, July 2nd, there's major leagues games going on. There's minor league games going on. You had the, draft stuff going on, summer college league stuff going on. There's a lot of things happening on the baseball calendar. Whereas January 15th, maybe it runs into like salary arbitration submission date or whatever, the most fun day on Twitter ever. But otherwise, the players get their own spotlight for a day, which I think is a cool thing. Like, it's kind of something, MLB is trying to do with the draft to give it its own spotlight. And, you can't have the draft in January because then you would run into some pretty serious conflicts with college baseball and all that. But, the one good thing about January 15th, or at least one of the things that I like the most about it, is that it does give these international players their own big day that, everybody in the baseball world is focused on that instead of, everything else that's usually going on in season.
And you get to go to the Dominican in January and not in the middle of the summer.
It's I try to being a Massachusetts resident, I try to I end up going in the warm weather months too, but it's always nice to be able to sneak out in the winter months and get down there.
As
Absolutely. So
we're two resident Minnesotans slash Wisconsinites, so we are incredibly jealous of that reality. Ben, let me ask you before we dig like really deep into the weeds on the international stuff. There is um, one more question I kind of want to ask. Right, so I think it's also true that you kind of partner with Carlos in looking ahead, um, and doing draft prep for the following draft cycle. Right, so like right now, I
Mhm.
believe today actually you guys released a BA top 125 prospects. And I can't help but notice that kind of age demographic kind of overlaps more closely to what you see in the international signing period with that work. Is there something about scouting and kind of prospecting on that particular age demographic that appeals to you? Because we always talk about how challenging it is to evaluate talent in the draft that we spend so much time talking about, and here we're talking
Mhm.
about players that are several years younger than that.
Yeah, like when, the draft used to be in June and then MLB decided to move it back to the middle of July, right? Like in the All-Star break, which is like, okay, typically we cover the draft, it's about a year at a time, and then move on to the next draft cycle after the current one ends. But if you're having the draft now in the middle or close to the end of July,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's like, well, geez, like half the summer circuit schedule is done. Like Team USA, the USA collegiate national team is already played. Half the Cape League is already spoken for. At that point, it's like, all right, well, we need to build more history on these players earlier, and the draft the draft moving back in the calendar was partly an impetus for that, but I think it also just makes sense to have more history on these players who are getting drafted. And yeah, like you said, the 2025 high school class is, right now those players are mostly 16, 17 years old, basically the same
Mm-hmm.
age as these players, these international players who just signed on January 15th, the Leo DeVry, the Jose Perdomos of the world. So, I think to me, it's that first age where, yes, obviously, like it's still a super long range projection, trying to project. I mean, minor league prospects is not easy. College players is not easy. High school players even more challenging, and the underclass players even more so. But to me, it's that first age where you start to really see players who have like legitimate major league tools. At that point, you
Mm.
have guys who are plus runners, or who have a plus arm, or close to it. Guys who are starting to show average major league power at times. They're mostly done growing. Maybe a guy might still grow an inch or so, or obviously still aberrational cases like like an O'Neill Cruz. I remember, like I think like the when he was trying out for, or maybe the Dodgers even had an agreement with him. He was like 6'1", and then he grew to like 6'4" by the time he signed, and then he was 6'6", and now he's 6'7". So still, occasional cases like that. But you get even younger than that, which obviously is what the teams are scouting right now internationally. Kids who are like 13, 14 years old. Like it's too young. It's too far away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's good for anybody. I don't think it's good for the teams. I don't think it's good for the players. I don't think it's good for the game. But like by the time these players are, the 2025 high school class, it's the same age as these international, now professional players. So it's good to be able to, and who are going to be drafted next year. So it's good to be able to, I should say, I'm fortunate to be able to travel, and have all the history I have on, knowing what the top 16, 17-year-old international prospects from the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, all over, what they look like at that age, and be able to calibrate with what the players like Ethan Holiday or
Mm-hmm.
Brady Ebel, Dean Moss, all these top up and coming players in the States who are the equivalent age. So makes it fun to be able to just kind of like compare, contrast, and be able to calibrate for both the domestic and the international side.
Right on.
So not too many days ago, there was an athletic report that felt kind of like deja vu, because I feel like we've been here before, but it talked about teams having had contact with or handshake deals with prospects. We've all heard that. But these guys were being reported to be, 16 when they were 18 or 19, which I think is always something that's kind of had its way in the international scene. But you're down there and you're part of it. You're familiar with the system. You're familiar with the setup. You said you talked to the trainers. How does this work? How do you think it needs to work so that players are protected, teams are protected, the process can be more efficient, effective? How does this ever get solved?
The part about the age falsification or players reaching these early agreements?
Well, maybe both, right? I mean, they're both problems.
Yeah. So yeah, the on the age, yeah. So the early agreement stuff is like, I remember we wrote like a big story. I think it literally was 10 years ago now, because I think it was 2000. Yeah, it was 2014. Because I remember like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who was still an amateur prospect at the time, who was going to sign, I think, in 2015, was included in the story about like how all of these teams were reaching these early deals, which at that time meant like a year before the players were eligible to sign. And then we put like another cover story on the magazine of it, maybe in like 2000, must have been 2019. Yeah, I think it was 2019, I want to say. So, yeah, I mean, it's just been going on for such a long time, but obviously now you have teams reaching agreements with players pretty regularly when they're 13 years old,
Wow.
14, pretty common for the top, or who team, as much as you can say for at that age who the top players are, who they think the top players are. By 13, 14, a lot of them already have agreements to sign. Now, mostly I think they end up holding up by the signing date, but it's hey, I give you my word, we have an agreement, but there's nothing in writing, there's nothing enforcing it. So teams can still back out of those deals. Sometimes it's the player too that backs out and gets more money from another team, but I think certainly the teams have a lot more leverage in that situation to back out of deals from their side, which puts the players in a really disadvantageous position. So, yeah, it's certainly something I'd like to see change, because it's not good for teams. I don't think any scout in baseball wants his job to depend on his ability to predict the future of players who are 13, 14 years old. I don't think and it's not good for the players to have to be ready to sign when they're 13, 14.
Mm-hmm.
And the trainers, the guys who have these programs in the DR and in Venezuela, they don't like it either. They don't want to have players trained and ready to get signed when they're 13, 14, and bringing them into their program even younger, and then paying all the costs that are associated with developing them, training, feeding, often housing, mom needs medicine, pay for that, all this stuff for, from the time these kids are 11, 12, up until now 16 and a half, 17 years old. So it's like everybody just loses in this scenario for the most part. So I hope it's something that can change. Obviously, MLB solution is international draft. That's at least their plan A, and then their plan B is, well, we didn't get an international draft, so we'll try again in the next CBA. So I don't think that's optimal either. As far as the age falsification thing, I mean, yeah, when you say deja vu, it's a good point. I mean, age falsification is something that's been going on in, the Dominican Republic primarily, Venezuela as well. There are certainly cases where it happens too. Um, but it's been going on in the Dominican Republic, like you said, basically forever. Now, has MLB been catching a lot of players in the last decade or so? Yeah, like they catch some, but there's a lot of players that I'm sure get through who are not using the their their actual age or in their actual identity. There's a lot of ways, the documentation process in the DR is not the same as it is. Just the standards for it are not the same as it is in the States. So it's, if you have the financial motivation and you could potentially get a big bonus for a player and get a big commission from that player who you're presenting as 16 years old is actually 18, 19, 20 years old. And yeah, there's a lot of motivation to be able to pay a lot of people off along the process to make that happen. So I don't know that age falsification itself is necessarily on the rise, but just from doing, a lot of my own work on this over the last few months, that it does seem like there have been more prominent players, it seems, getting caught up in this year compared to in previous years.
So as we talk about that whole deal with the prospects and the international free agency, the International Big Board at Baseball America, brilliant piece of work. Why, when we look at prospect lists and you start with a disclaimer, right? This isn't like all the other prospect lists where we're talking about prospect number 1 through prospect number 25 and they're rated that way. Why at BA on that list do you rank by the potential bonuses and not by the upside scouting grade scale, things like that?
Yeah, so like if you go back to 2008 when I started covering international prospects, we would cover it, but we didn't actually rank by talent until I think it was 2012 with like a list more similar to what you would see with our the Twins top 30 prospects or our draft top 100 or now 500 prospects, right? So we did that for for a long time, and the process tried to be extremely thorough, calling a whole bunch of international scouts uh, across baseball to um, you know get their opinions on players, a lot of the top players who would be signing each year out of Latin America, or I should say all of the international prospects. Uh, but at a certain point, it became really challenging to do that, where because so many of these top players would have agreements to sign 2-3 years in advance of their signing date. I would be calling, and it still is the case, just because of how the process is working. I'd be calling the international scouting director and say, "Hey, what did you think about this catcher who's going to, sign for a couple $1 million? Oh, they break down the hitting, the catch. Oh, I didn't like the way he received or blocked. I didn't think he was going to stay behind the plate. But that was the last time I saw him was like 2 years ago when he was 14 years old. Because these players, once they have an agreement in place, they're not going around and doing all these tryouts for other clubs. They're not going to work out for the Yankees and the Cubs and the Twins and all these other clubs at their academies. They're not doing big showcases. You might, as a scout, run into them at their field and see them doing some BP or taking some ground balls or maybe you catch them in a game that their trainer happens to be putting them in and against another program or something like that. But you're not really getting competitive scouting looks
Hmm.
at these players for the most part. There still are exceptions here and there, but it just became to the point where it was like we had to be like honest and transparent about like the certainty of the information we have on these players now is not equivalent to what it is in the draft, right? Like Walker Jenkins probably committed to North Carolina. I don't know, when he was probably like 15 years old or something. I don't know off the top of my head, but you have high school players committing to colleges. It's going to change now because of these new rules, but when they're like 13, 14 years old, eighth graders, ninth graders, but they're still going around and doing all these events, and every MLB team is scouting all these guys leading up until the draft, and it's just not the same internationally. So I just felt like, is this fair to anybody
Hmm.
in the process? Like, is this fair for like one, to our readers to try to like pretend like we're like this is not going on, or try to pretend like the information on these players is like totally equivalent to what we have elsewhere in our other processes. So I don't want to, I didn't want to devalue or degrade our own reputation at Baseball America. I didn't think it was fair to, the players. Like, I'm talking to that scout who's crushing that catcher's catching and receiving skills from from 2 years ago when he was 14 years old. Like, is that really fair to use that in the evaluation? So, um, it's not really fair to the players. It's not. I didn't feel like it was fair to the teams, and then also just wanted to bring more attention to just the public that, like, hey, like, this is going on. Like, it's not something that's good that all of these super early agreements are happening. So, but then at the same time, it's like, look, even if we're not going to rank on talent, we have to, still want to obviously like I love covering international prospects. They deserve to be covered. I want their information to be out there. So, okay, if I don't feel comfortable at this point in time putting out a true talent ranking, something you see again, like with our top 30 list for the Brewers or Twins or another club, we at least know or have a pretty good idea of what all of these players are going to sign for. So that's at least an objective way to line up these players. Now, is the guy who signs for the most money necessarily the best player, or the guy who signs for $2 million necessarily better than the guy that maybe even the same team is signing for $300,000? No, not always. And a lot of times I'll have a team tell me like, hey, like, yeah, we're giving this guy like, 1.2 million, but the best guy we have is this guy who's signing for $200,000 because
Hmm.
he's just the $200,000 guy is, in this context, a late bloomer. I don't know if you actually call a 16, 17-year-old player a late bloomer, but, within that setting of, oh yeah, he, agreed probably when he was like 14 years old for $200,000, and he's grown, 2-3 inches, and now he's running 6'4" instead of 7'1", and his arm is ticked up, and he's got more power, and X, Y, and Z, and he's just taken off since then. So just wanted to be able to still provide people with an objective way to line up the players leading into what was July 2nd and now January 15th. So we're able to obviously expand that out to 100 players, and going forward, it's something where now I do like more. There are more players who are playing in some more like public game environments than they used to. I think teams are realizing that, like, hey, just because we have an agreement with this player, um, doesn't mean we need to like shield him from having other teams see him. Like it's actually really, really important from age 14 to 16, 17 to have these guys playing in a lot of games and develop and get better so that by the time they sign, like they're actually making progress instead of stagnating in terms of their development. So it may be something it's something I'm considering changing going forward, but it definitely takes a lot more calls now to people down on the ground and than ever before who are seeing these guys because like there's literally guys who are signing for 2, 3, $4 million, $5 million, who some international directors literally have never seen by the time they sign, which would be obviously pretty unheard of for a scouting director in the States to never see somebody who went in the first round.
Right, for sure. A lot has been made of how strong the 2023 draft is going to be even before the draft. Thinking about the international groups, how does this most recent group compare to the previous handful of classes?
This current international signing class.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's where it's tough too because it's like, I feel like in the States I can give you a good feel for okay, like the 2024 draft I think is a down year for the draft, and I could have told you that, and I probably think I did say that like even a year ago at this time, just about the 2024 high school class 2 years out. I felt like, ooh, like there's guys I like, but it's just it's not up to certainly what the 2023 class was shaping up to be, and I can tell you, 2026 already looks like it's going to be a really strong class for at least on the high school side for the draft. But with the international signings, what makes it so tough now is to say just for the class as a whole is like, these guys all agreed to sign for the most part, like 2-3 years ago, and just that competitive scouting set of looks on these players isn't even the same as what we would get here in the States. So it's hard to say. Like Leo DeVry certainly stands out as a super talented player at the top of the class, and have a bunch of other guys I have like good reports on, but like until these guys really get into pro ball and step onto the field in the DSL, it's hard for me to really say with a whole lot of conviction.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me ask you this one last question before we kind of dig into some team specific guys from this class. This is something we've talked about a little bit, and I'm really curious for your take on it. So, do you feel like orgs have a consistent approach to the international signing window, right? And so examples I would kind of offer are like the Padres, right? Just signed DeVry. Like, I feel like you could maybe loosely categorize them as targeting more like a higher impact guy from close to the top of the bonus list, right? And we always notice that the Twins tend to take 2 or 3. So sorry. The Twins tend to take 2 or 3 guys in like the 1 to 2.5 million bonus range. Brewers typically have a really big class. Are there trends like that you notice, or are we making up stories and looking for things that aren't there?
No, that's true. I mean, some teams are sometimes are a lot more willing to kind of go all in or close to all in with their bonus pool on one player than others. Like the Tigers or the Rockies, other clubs where you never really seen them do that. It doesn't mean they won't target, high end players, but whereas the Yankees, right, with Jason Dominguez or Brando Maia a couple of years ago, or Roderick Arias too, I guess, who's also now in our top 100. or the Padres also a good example with Salas and DeVry are more willing to do that. And um, I think if you look at the track record too of the top player, like our top ranked player who signs every year out of the whether it's the DR or Venezuela, it's like a surprisingly good track record. Um, Going back to like Eloy Jimenez and
Hmm.
Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Marco Luciano, Jason Dominguez, um, obviously Wander Franco has other issues, but just as far as talent, obviously coming through, um, which surprises me, frankly, just covering these players because they're 16 years old, they're super long range projections, but if you go all in on that guy, like you still have to pick obviously the right player, which now that the deals are being done at 13, 14 years old is how confident are you that you really have that number one player, especially by the time he's 16 or 17? It's harder to do. But if you get the right guy, yeah, it can be the right strategy. And then I think it depends on the year. Some teams, um, will do that some years and will shift their strategy around other years. I think more than anything, certain teams just teams generally have their own scouting philosophies and priority list, right? Like checkpoints, things they look for and really value and prioritize, right? So like the Brewers right now, whereas before you might see them sign a guy like, like remember like Larry Ernesto, who they signed, who for a whole lot of money, who was this, you know, beautiful athlete, a lot of tools, could run, um, probably should have played like wide receiver at some Power Five program and been a superstar wideout for some college football team, but was super raw also and just couldn't really hit. Since they've brought in their current international group, you really see them prioritize uh, bat to ball skills, guys who can control the strike zone at least as much as you can judge that at that age, or the Guardians too, or another team where um, every time you see their signing class or their DSL team, you're like, wow, these guys are a lot smaller than
Hmm.
everybody else's group, but they make a ton of contact. They really have a lot of instincts for the game usually, whereas other teams really place a high priority on physicality or strength, power. Other teams, it's more about really prioritizing up the middle guys, and everybody kind of does, right? Obviously, to certain extent, but um, certain teams really want that premium athleticism, premium position guy, and then are willing to pay more money at least for a big bonus on a guy where they might have some more raw skills, but have a really high likelihood of staying in the middle of the diamond. So I think that how the spending philosophy can certainly change year to year depending on the talent pool available.
Hmm.
But certainly there's scouting philosophies that teams have that you can kind of see consistently in their signings year after year.
Yes, I'm so relieved that we're not crazy. Okay. Um, all right, wanna transition to asking you about some like team specific guys, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we cover a weird trio of teams. We talk mostly about the Brewers, Cubs, and Twins. So kind of want to start with their, I guess, more prominent bonus guys, and just get your take on things that you like about each player. And then maybe if there's anyone under the radar you think folks should be paying attention to. Would love to hear those names too. But we'll start with the Brewers, who, I mean, I have up the international signing tracker at BA right now. The Brewers class is just it's like
Enormous. Yeah.
tens and tens of names. Um, their most notable guys: Jorge Quintana, Jesus May, Luis Pena, trio of shortstops. Um, do you have a favorite there? And anything in particular stick out to you about any of those guys that you care to highlight?
Yeah, Quintana, we have already ranked pretty high in the Brewers top 30. Um, maybe partly just, I mean, certainly good reports on Quintana, but when you just look at the most recent Brewers international signings, just as far as their top bonus guy, like Jackson Churio,
Hmm.
phenomenal signing. Luis Lara got to high A last year after hitting really well at low A as an 18-year-old, skipping over the Arizona Complex League, and or 2023, Yoferi Rodriguez, great year in the DSL, one of the top prospects in the Dominican Summer League. So they've done a really good job hitting on their top guys, and then obviously Jefferson Curo, a little bit lower bonus guy too. So they've certainly been identifying some pretty good players recently, and Quintana, he's not the he's a shortstop now. He's not like the athlete or runner of like Luis Lara, Jackson Churio, but he is a very advanced hitter, 6'2", switch hitter, a lot of contact from both sides of the plate. Seems like a guy who has a pretty good feel for the strike zone too. I mean, again, like hitting a lot of these checkpoints we talked about that the Brewers typically seem to be signing recently. And
Hmm.
then he's 6'2". There's some power there now. It's not like crazy raw power, but certainly a lot of room and bat speed, strength, projection to be able to grow into more power. Given that he's obviously still 16 years old, so definitely heard a lot of good things about him offensively. Not like a super quick, explosive guy at shortstop. I figure they'll probably put him out there, give him a chance to stay there, see how it goes. But it sounds like I would bet probably third base with him, but just based on the offensive profile, seems like somebody who has a really good chance to make an impact at that position. And yeah, again, just looking at the way all of their top signings, at least the last 3 years, have hit right out of the gate. Yeah, I expect him to also just again be one of the top performers this year in the DSL.
I gotta ask you a quick follow up here
Yeah.
because before we move on and talk Cubs a little bit too. So listener question came in here that I figured I'd ask you, and we have some folks who are super in the weeds on the Brewers. So Spencer asks, any of the Brewers pitching acquisitions stick out to you? I realize their list is tremendously long, but as you mentioned, all those guys recently, right? Um, Kind of interesting up the middle position players who have hit. Spencer was curious if there's any pitchers that have stuck out to you from the Brewers list for 2024.
Yeah, so they, I mean, it's not uncommon to, some teams are more willing to pay for pitching, but generally teams don't want to spend big money
Hmm.
on pitching in the international market because, they don't really want to sign. A lot of them don't want to spend a first round pick on a high school pitcher, and they're 18 years old for the most part. So the you can imagine the risk is even more when you're trying to sign a 16-year-old pitcher who's 2 years younger and probably making the decision even younger than that on when to sign him. And we've just seen the track record of big bonus international pitchers is not great. Whereas, like the entire Astros World Series rotation is guys they from a couple of years ago, obviously plucked from, Framber Valdez and Christian
Hmm.
Javier and Luis Garcia, all these guys who were smaller bonus guys or guys they signed when they were older, 17, 18, 19 years old. So, the Brewers are the same way. They pretty much all their big bonus guys this year um, were hitters. And then I'm sure there's going to be somebody from this the smaller bonus guys who ends up being Uribe, somebody like that who ends up throwing gas or turns into a legitimate prospect. But for the most part, like a lot of these guys right now are like some flavor of like 87, 91, 92, varying degrees of feel for spin and or strike throwing
Mm.
uh skills or erraticness. And then at some point this summer, one of them will, or maybe down the road beyond that, one of them will pop and be, go from that 88, 92 guy to now being 93, 97. Wish I could tell you which one, but just kind of, I guess, my long-winded answer is saying I don't really know, but most of the pitching for them was the kind of the lower level guys, and waiting for one of those guys to pop.
Makes sense.
So similar deal, only now we talk about the Cubs. So a couple of the big names for the Cubs: shortstop Fernando Cruz, pitcher Yonder Maria. Anything more about the Cubs and their direction in international free agency and the group that they brought in?
Yeah, I remember seeing Fernando Cruz. I mean, this is like literally, this was before the pandemic, so it must have been December 2019, because it was at a showcase. They brought players over to the winter meetings, like a whole bunch of players, and he was, one of the youngest players there. And it was just like, whoa. I mean, like, he probably was like 13 years old at the time, and it was just like, all right, he clearly sticks out as somebody who's just different, and still is super talented. Just a lot of bat speed, power, potential. Not like one of the, not like 6'3", 6'4", like hulking slugger. He's maybe 6 feet, probably a little underneath that, but a lot of bat speed, ability to impact the ball to all fields. Barrel stays in the zone for a long time. Some scouts I talked to saw swing and miss when they saw him in game. So something to monitor, see how that goes once they actually get into official games in the DSL. But power, he's got speed, he can run. Pretty good actions at shortstop. Somebody I think has a pretty good chance to be able to stick at short. So somebody from obviously an early age who really jumped out, and maybe isn't at the level of hitter or the level of overall prospect as somebody like DeVry, but somebody who definitely belongs in the toward the top of the class in terms of the most talented players. And then Yonder Maria, who you mentioned, the Cubs signed him, right-handed pitcher out of the Dominican Republic. Not like a super huge bonus guy. There aren't a lot of pitchers who are, but where I was talking about with the Brewers, probably a whole bunch of guys who are in that, mid upper 80s, maybe touching low 90s bucket, waiting to see which guy pops. Sometimes they pop before they sign, and that seems to be the case with Yonder Maria, because he's been up to mid 90s, touching 96 miles an hour, which is a pretty big jump from the kind of mid upper 80s when a lot of teams were seeing him early on. He's 6'4". He's got real good feel for a breaking ball. Is it going to be starter, reliever? I don't know. Like, we have to go out and see how many strikes he throws, how it looks in the DSL this year. But definitely in terms of the pitching prospects trending up, where you're starting to already see some pretty big early returns and a big uptick in stuff. He's one guy that jumps out, not just from the Cubs class, but just in terms of the overall pitching. Because again, like I feel like I have a pretty good feel for who what the top 16, 17-year-old pitchers, not just in Latin America, but in the United States look like. And we do have one kid in the 25 class who's 16 years old who does throw 99, which is super rare.
Ridiculous.
But there's also only a handful of guys in the States that age who are, throwing 96. So obviously a lot more to it than just raw velocity to being a good pitching, to being a good pitcher or a good pitching prospect. But really, definitely a guy who jumps out as far as the pitching for this class.
For sure. Okay, so I got to ask you about the Twins too. I got to tell you that Grumpy Twins Twitter is very down on their international classes recently. Ariel Castro, Yasser Mercedes, or, a couple of their more recent classes top guys, who I don't think really have had that much time to see what they're all about yet. But curious for your thoughts on the Twins guys. I know 3 kind of prominent names on the list, right? Daibo de los Santos, Eduardo Beltre, and then kind of Victor Leal is kind of a tertiary guy. And curious how, this is another listener question I'm folding in here. Someone asked, like, how does De Los Santos in particular kind of stack up against some of the other Twins pickups from recent windows, like Yasser Mercedes, Ariel Castro, and what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I remember especially seeing a lot of Yasser Mercedes when he was an amateur player, and he always stood out for like his physicality, athleticism, strength, potential to him, power, speed. There was also a lot of swing and miss. He did have, he had a good DSL. Like he hit a lot better actually than I thought he would have in the DSL. So, but obviously this last season was not ideal for him. So, yeah, I think there's, I wouldn't say he's like a similar, like De Los Santos and Belt. I wouldn't necessarily say they're similar to Mercedes, but there is some similarities in terms of the high end athleticism that comes with some rawness with the hitting ability. I think De Los Santos, in particular, the tools really jump out. It's like a huge arm. Like conservatively, it's a 60 arm. It's really probably like, if you're going to use the whole scale, it's a 70 arm. He's a plus runner, good athlete. Some guys think shortstop, something. No, put him in center field. Let him use his speed and run around there. And then offensively, I think that's where the risk is with him. Is he going to hit? Some teams are more skeptical. There's definitely some bat speed and power projection there because of the bat speed, how lean he is, how much potential he has to get stronger. But that would be one of the risks with him. And then Eduardo Beltre, another guy who stands out for the athleticism that he has, center field, plus runner now. Like, it's one of the tricky things about players this age is like, all right, well, which direction are they going to go physically? Like, how is their body going to develop? Are they going to retain their speed and, stay up the middle, or going to get thicker and grow sideways and move to a corner? If you had told me, I loved Julio Rodriguez when he was a prospect. Like, I was enamored with his bat and power. I never would have thought he would have played center field. So guys can surprise you in good ways, surprise you in bad ways too, just in terms of how they develop physically and what it ultimately does to their defensive and obviously their overall value from it. But, so I know some scouts think he's a solid enough hitter. Others, have more concerns about the pure hit ability with him. So 2 really high end athletes to be able to come into the system. And then obviously the DSL, I think this year will go a long way to determining or giving us a more accurate gauge of where their true hitting ability is right now.
For sure. All right, well, Ben, we're gonna wrap it up, man. Because
I gotta ask a question.
Go ahead.
So, obviously, Twins fan more than any other team. Follow the international stuff, but follow the Twins more. When the Twins signed Jorge Polanco and Max Kepler in July of 2009, and then later added Miguel Sano to that group.
Mm-hmm.
You got 3 major leaguers, 2 guys that played in all-star games, Max Kepler, who's been a solid regular for years. In my opinion, that's the greatest signing group the Twins have ever had. what sticks out to you as like the greatest single year haul that any teams had? Maybe that's putting you on the spot, but how good was that Twins class of 2009 compared to any other class that you can think of? Because you've been doing this for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Are there groups that stand out like, holy smokes, that team really hit the jackpot in that year?
Yeah, I mean that one stands out to me too. Like I think about that one as one of the best years ever because you sign all these guys and you know that like, maybe you'll get a few big leaguers out of it. These guys are so far away. You put a lot of money into guys and it's like, yeah, we hope this guy clicks, but the odds are still stacked against you for the majority of these guys. To be able to hit on three pretty impactful players like that, like guys who are everyday players, and especially with, the case of Polanco, for instance, I'd say a pretty great major league player. Yeah, that's hard to top. I think of, I'm sure there are better classes than this, but I remember in 2013, our top three prospects that year, which I feel pretty good about, was one, Eloy Jimenez, two, Gleyber Torres, three, Rafael Devers, and the Cubs signed 1 and 2. Which again, like, all right, well, you hope like one of them works out, and all right, like Eloy's, talk about like physical development going not the way you want. That's certainly been the case with him, but like he's had some pretty big offensive years. The Cubs signed him and Gleyber Torres, who I guess also is probably a pretty polarizing player for the Yankees fan base. But to get those two guys at the top of your class in a year, and for both those guys to turn out the way they have, obviously, they didn't keep those guys, but certainly the Cubs don't regret making the trades that they did to win the World Series. So that certainly stands out to me for like, a team signing some high-end guys, multiple high-end guys, and those guys turning into pretty good big leaguers. But I mean, geez, if you just sign, if all you get from your signing class is like one player and ends up being like Juan Soto, then like, you still, you hit the jackpot. Like anything else is just gravy for even the next couple of years sometimes.
Well,
So.
when you're short on ideas to write about, you can take your top 10 classes of all time, and I will definitely read that one.
Yeah, no, it's probably a fun project to get going on.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating because it's like you hit on 3 players in one class. That's huge because the Twins for years had maybe one, maybe a marginal player, but that to me was just one that sticks out even 15 years later for how great it was, and for them to all be in the organization for 10 plus years too. That to me was just, that's so cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right. Well, take 2, Ben. We're gonna get you out of here because as Jeremy just proved, we will just continue asking you questions. Ben, before you go, anything out or coming out at BA that you want to plug for listeners that we can help promote?
Yeah, I mean, we have all of obviously our top 100, but then all of our top 30 prospect rankings are out for BA subscribers. So top 30s for all 30 teams, all 900 reports, includes all the international signings too from January 15th. So Quintana and all those guys, Fernando Cruz, all those players are, well, either they're in there or if they're not in there, they're accounted for, but just not ranked in there. So, but yeah, no, thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate the all the questions and all the time, and always appreciate everybody subscribing to BA as well.
Yes, sir. 100%. You heard the man. If you're not already, make sure you are subscribed to BA and supporting great baseball writing and baseball content in general. Ways that you can support our show: retweeting it, downloading it, subscribing to the YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter at DTS _pod1. This has been an awesome episode. Excited to get back with you guys next week. Until then, catch you later.